live results are from 2019, prior to.
So you're gonna go up to Andy later and like, is this your ended mob? 4,680.
Yeah.
How are you in this event?
No, well, if I did do the first part, I definitely wouldn't follow it up with the second one, Randy. How are you in this event? Yeah. I'm the commentator. I'm just here to investigate. You know, what bank did you rob?
Detective Ali.
Yeah, I'm on the case. Addamo, ace-4.
In this episode of Weekly Poker Hand, we're taking a look at a hand from very early in a $25,000 buy-in tournament that Triton Poker put on. Notice 78 players out of 81 remain, so this is just very, very early in the tournament, which you often do not get to see so often in televised poker, so it's really cool that they are showing us this. Michael Addamo, world-class crusher, folds to him in the cutoff. He's playing 115 big blinds, deep effective. He opens it up with the ace-4 offsuit. It's probably a little bit loose, but if your opponents are not going to 3-bet you as often as they perhaps should, because everybody's scared of Addamo, then that allows Addamo to raise slightly wider preflop because he's going to see the flop and realize his equity better. So he raises it up with the ace-4 over to Michael Soyza. Two Michaels battling it out today. Soyza in the big blind with queen 5 of spades has a very easy call. This hand loves to see the flop, and to be fair, all suited hands love to see the flop whenever you are getting good pot odds in the big blind closing the action. Let's go to the flop.
Ooh, and what a lovely flop this is for Michael, Randy.
A lot of connection. And big blind is perceived to hit this board more than a pre-flop raiser.
That said, Addamo does have middle pair.
Does got middle pair. So is I thinking about leading? And it's mainly because he thinks that he's got a range advantage here.
But Addamo, that fact is not lost on him, so this ace-4 could still very well feel like the best hand.
Oh, he most definitely thinks he's got the best hand a lot.
Doesn't have a blind double, but just has like 0, 0, 0.
The lead is not a common play, so definitely Addamo is trying to see if call is the best play or potentially raise. He will call.
The flop comes 6, 4, 2, 2 spades, giving Soyza a gut shot and a flush draw and an overcard. It's a really good hand. And he gives Addamo middle pair, nothing else. This is a spot where Soyza actually decides to lead for half pot. And we're purely going to talk about GTO World today. In GTO World, you really do not want to lead when you are deep stacked. That's because when you do have a really good hand that is vulnerable to being outdrawn, leading doesn't really force your opponent to fold out hands with decent equity. And when you're bluffing, you also just don't get to put a whole lot of money in the pot. So that's a problem with your good hands. Another problem with your marginal hands that may want to lead, like let's say 6-5, is that if you bet the flop and get raised, it is miserably bad. Whereas if we were playing much shallower stacked, like let's say 20 big blinds deep, you could bet the flop with 6-5, get raised, and then just not fold, right? So it allows you to lead with a much larger portion of your range. So I don't think Soyza needs to have any leads in this scenario, but if he was shallower stacked, I think it would be way better. I guess I didn't even mention this, but you only really want to lead on boards that are really, really good for your range, and the low card boards are going to be good for the big blind. So it's a good spot to lead in terms of the flop, but I don't think it's a great spot to lead in terms of situation in general because Soyza is too deep. That said, if he is going to lead, this is a pretty good hand to lead because it's probably not good at the moment, but it has a ton of equity. And if you do get raised, you can stick around with your very good draw. So Soyza does bet 6,000 half pot. Addamo with his middle pair has a very, very easy call. Do not raise an Addamo spot. That would be a blunder. If you raise here and get called or re-raise, you're never in great shape. Whereas if you call, you force Soyza to stay in with all of his bluffs and maybe super thin value hands with like a random 4-3 or something like that. So Addamo calls. Let's go to the turn. The turn? Let's go to the turn.
Try to maneuver the turn. Yeah, it's a tricky one.
Does add an 8 to Soyza's outs, as the straight draw improves to two-way.
With his lead on the flop, he probably expects Addamo to call the flop a lot with even ace high, ace king high, ace queen high. So I think Soyza will probably continue betting again, expecting a lot of fold equity.
Yeah, there it is, 18K now.
And this is not a good card for Addamo in the sense that, let's just say my opponent was leading the flop with some straight draw.
Yeah,
Well,
7, 8, 5,
now.
7.
Yeah. And if his opponent's got a straight draw or flush draw, lots of equity against an ace-4.
The turn brings the 7 of clubs, which is a pretty good card for Soyza's range, because if you think about a lot of Soyza's bluffs, it's going to be hands like 8-5 for a gut shot, 7-5 for open-ended straight draw that just made top pair, 7-6, top pair, kind of okay kicker that just made 2 pair, 7-4 maybe, right? Plus he could, of course, have flopped a hand like 6-4, 5-3, whatever. So this is a spot where Soyza probably does want to continue betting a large chunk of the time, presuming he's going to lead the flop kind of wide and just continue betting the turn decently wide, which, again, maybe is not quite so GTO approved. In terms of hands that want to bet, this is a really good hand to bet, Queen 5, because it has flush draw, overcard, and open-ended straight draw at this point. So the question becomes, how much should we bet? Going back to GTO world, in these spots, you usually want to have 2 bet sizes because we have 2 very, very clear distinctions in strength of our value hands. We either have really good hands, like straights, sets, 2 pairs, but then we also have a lot of 1-pair hands, like 6-5, maybe 7-5, maybe 6-3. And those hands can continue betting. But those hands are going to use a really small bet. Notice here, Soyza used a 3/4 pot bet. I think the thin value hands are going to want to go very small. And then the very good hands and the high equity draws are going to want to go very big, like over the size of the pot. So I like that Soyza sized up a little bit to 3/4 pot, but I think he's going to be able to apply a whole lot more pressure to most of Addamo's range with a substantially larger bet of something like 1.5x pot, maybe 2x pot even. He really, really, really wants to be blasting it because he wants to apply a lot of pressure to Addamo's middle pairs, right? Like this ace-4, ace highs, etc. Because, you know, Addamo's going to be in a kind of marginal spot facing this medium bet, whereas if you make it bigger, you just get a ton of folds from those types of hands. Let's see how Addamo proceeds against the 3/4 pot bet with his junkie pair.
You can see it there, 48%. The shy side of a coin flip.
Pretty sick call. Wow. He's tough to play against. You can't shake him on the flop and turn.
You're not wrong.
Addamo has a miserable spot here, but he does decide to find the call. And look, I certainly don't fault him for the call. I will say that some players, maybe not Soyza in particular, but some players, when they lead, they're usually very bluff heavy. And if they are very bluff heavy, then you can't go around folding pairs. Now, I do realize the 7 is not a particularly great card for Addamo, because like I said, Soyza's going to have some random 7s. But a lot of players, especially if they are afraid that Addamo is just going to apply maximum pressure and raise, they may not bet their 7s, and they may not bet their 6s. So now, if Soyza is potentially not betting his 7s and not betting his 6s, or maybe using a different size, then that allows Addamo to call substantially wider because it still makes Soyza's range tilted towards bluffs, because it's kind of hard to have a super duper nut hand, right? There's not that many combinations of them. And there are a lot of hands containing a 5 or a 3 that would potentially lead and then keep betting, plus there's lots of flush draws. So, look, I think Addamo probably should fold here, but there's something to be said for just making it clear to your opponents that you are not planning to back down. And maybe Addamo has that read that I just gave. Or maybe not. Who knows? Maybe ace-4 is just good enough. Addamo does call. Let's go to the river.
I'd be worried if I was Soyza right now, even though his opponent's got just a pair of 4s, but it does seem like Addamo, it's got some pocket pair that's just not really let it go.
The commentators mentioned that Soyza is known to be on the more tight, aggressive side. He's not out there triple barreling all the time and blasting off. What I want to know is, what style poker do you play? Are you usually a little bit tight and passive? Are you loose and splashy and passive? Are you tight and aggressive? Or are you loose and aggressive? Take a second. Consider how you actually play, and let me know in the comment section down below.
Yeah, from Soyza's seat, I could completely understand him perceiving this to be like a middling pocket pair.
Plus, when you hold Queen 5 spades, so you're trying to bluff off some spades, well, you're holding 2 spades, you're blocking those hands, so it's more likely your opponent's holding showdown.
Yeah.
And then you got a player like Addamo who, doesn't like to get bluff off of hands here and there. It's tough to sell this story. He's going to...
You know what? Okay, well, hang on. We're going to the time bank first and foremost, as Soyza mulls over his action here on the river with 60,000 in the middle. Soyza's also self-aware, and I don't know about you, Randy, but I get the sense that most players think Soyza's pretty snug, that he's not out there three-barreling light. And leveraging that, he goes full pot here on the river. And this, to me, starts to look very credible if I'm sitting on the ace-4.
It is very credible.
After some deliberation, Soyza decides to put in a pot-sized bet on the 9 of clubs river. The board again is 6, 4, 2, 7, 9. Soyza has the queen high. And kind of like on the turn, I think Soyza needs to have two very distinct bet sizes. Either a very small bet size for his thin value hands, or a gigantic bet size for his effective nut hands that are trying to get called by any one pair hand, like aces. So the question is, should this queen 5 of spades bet gigantic? And in terms of bluffs that make a lot of sense to bluff on the flop and the turn, but not the river, spades are the hands that make the most sense to not want to fire again on the river. And that's because when you have 2 spades in your hand, you make it far more difficult for your opponent to have a hand that will automatically fold to a river bet, like ace queen of spades, ace 5 of spades, king queen of spades, right? These are hands that Addamo could have, but now he can't, which means he's slightly more tilted towards having a strong hand, Addamo, I mean. So if Addamo is slightly more tilted towards having a strong hand, that should make Soyza not inclined to bluff with this type of hand. That said, I fully realize that it is obviously tempting when you bet the flop and the turn with the queen high, and you know Addamo is going to call you kind of wide on the flop and maybe on the turn. You probably need to go for it on the river. So if we are going to go for it on the river, and we know our value range to blast the river should be really, really strong, like sets and 2 pairs that are almost always good, I think Soyza, again, needs to go very big, like 1.5x pot or 2 times pot. He really wants to put Addamo in a tough spot when Addamo has an overpair. And as you bet smaller and smaller, overpairs just become kind of easy calls. So he does go pot. And look, I don't mind it. I like that he's betting big, but I think this hand would have gone potentially better for him if he bet a little bit bigger on the turn and then also bigger on the river. Let's see if Addamo finds the hero call.
Now, okay, so what's important in this hand for Addamo is that flop lead. That changes ranges a lot. So he's going to be like, okay, if you had a flush draw, would you lead the flop? Would you maybe go for check call or check raise? 5x. Time bank chimps coming in. This is a polarizing bet when you see the pot size bet. So Addamo might be thinking, if you had a 7x, a 9x, would you really fold pot size bet? No, you probably would bet less. So that makes the ace-4 want to call a bit more. Don't block those flush draws, right?
Yeah, the
That's
lack
important.
of a spade in Addamo's hand, I think, is really to Soyza's detriment here.
Yeah, but it's tough. You got a 4, so you block a little bit of sets. It's important a little bit.
One more time bank being used here, and boy, Soyza's in the blender a bit. Just queen high. He knows it's no good.
So Addamo might be thinking, okay, if I had a pair, would you really try to bluff me off of it? Do you think I would fold like 8-7 or like ace-6? Do you think I'll fold like pocket 8s for this sizing? These are things that will cross your mind. Man, if he can make this call, it'd be so sick.
He's already burned 3 time banks.
It's not a standard play where you see someone lead the flop, lead the turn, and pot size the river on this board texture.
I wouldn't mind a look at Soyza right now just to see the view from Addamo's seat.
Yeah. Oh, here we go.
Yeah. There you go, boys. Thanks for that.
Oh, he's not shaking. He's composed.
You win.
You
Oh
win.
my gosh, he found the call.
What a player,
And
Michael
that is a
Addamo.
statement call.
After much deliberation, Michael Addamo finds the hero call and is rewarded with a chunky pot. A lot of people may look at this and say, how in the world could Addamo possibly call with only 4th pair? In this spot, Addamo's hand is actually really good to call with. Take a second and think about it. Why is Addamo's hand really good to call with? Well, he has no spades, which is very good, because Addamo really wants Soyza to have busted spade draws. Now, I know I just said spade draws should not bluff the river every time, but a lot of people just will. You give them queen eye on the river, they're going to bluff, right? So the fact that Addamo has no spades is very, very good. Also, Addamo does not have a 5 or a 3. which are cards that would potentially bluff the flop, like King 3, right? King 3 may potentially bluff the flop. And the fact that Addamo does not have a 5 or a 3 is also very good. So when you are calling large bets on the river where your opponent's essentially saying I either have a very good made hand or I have nothing, you really, 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 really do not want to have cards that interact with the cards that Soyza would be bluffing with. And right here, that's spades, 5s, and 3s, right? Addamo has none of it, so his hand becomes a potential hero call. The question then becomes, how wide is Soyza going for value? Is Soyza going to bet pot on this river with a random 9 or a 7? And at least in my experience, most people do not do that, especially if you, Addamo in this case, are a strong battling opponent, because they're not going to want to bet and get raised, because it's a disaster here if you bet 60K and then Addamo just puts you all in and you're sitting here with 8-7 or something like that, even though that may be good enough to go for thin value with a big bet. It's close. Maybe it's a little bit too weak, but whatever. What I'm saying is, if Soyza's range is highly tilted towards super nut hands and busted draws, and there's a lot of busted draws available, and you don't block any of them, those are times you need to be finding hero calls. Addamo recognizes this and scoops a nice pot. That's me for today. If you enjoyed today's video, do me a favor, click the like and subscribe button down below, click the notification bell, and look, I love watching Michael Addamo play, and I have another hand lined up for you next, where he plays one of the craziest hands I've ever seen in the super high roller bowl. Check it out. Good luck in your games. Have fun. Make the most of your opportunities, and I'll talk to you next time.